Now we are. Okay. So the translation on 177 of Basic Questions, vacillating, is just wrong. It's literally holding back, which is just almost a synonym of self-concealment. And my way of translating it has been, just it feels right to me, something like, because it's called a vacillating, hesitant refusal on page 178, and often. I think you should cross out vacillating and hesitant. I can't imagine what they mean, and put reluctant refusal. And this reluctant is just the same as the earth. It's this business of withdrawing and resisting being brought out of unconcealment. And there's no, I mean, it makes one wonder about the translators. I don't know what they think he's talking about. What could be vacillating, and what could be, what was the other word, hesitating about the clearing.
What's the German?
What's that?
What's the German?
I looked it up and wrote it down, but I think it's zurückhalten, but I don't think it is. That would be too easy to see. That would be really hanging back. I'll have to look it up. Sorry, I looked it up and then
It's not Fairhope?
No.
It's not.
It's Zogerend. Z-O with an umlaut, G-E-R-E-N-D, something like Zogerend. Yeah, which does mean hesitating and does mean vacillating, and a lot of other things too. Under one of which is holding back, which seems to me a lot more likely to be what Heidegger's meaning, because it makes sense and fits with other things. Anyway, with that warning, well, there's one other thing I should tell you to help you read this. On page 172, for instance, even though you're not even supposed to read that, you see all over, and this, I just picked this one, leaping ahead into the essentialization of truth, and then indication of the essentialization of truth. You're bound to hear that as some kind of essentialism, because essentialism is in the air and is a bad thing. But when he says the essentialization of truth, the German word is Wesung, W-E-S-U-N-G, which is related to Wesen, which is the word for essence. So you can see why they translate it that way. But I was going to say this later in the lecture, but I can say it now as well. All this talk about essence, you've got to hear it constantly, differently than what you normally think of as the word essence. Heidegger goes into how the essence isn't the abstract, isn't somehow this very general characteristic of everything that is a chair, would be the essence of chair. But the way Heidegger uses essence, it means how something works. So the essence of truth isn't the most general, abstract feature of truth, or the characteristic of everything that's true, or the necessary and sufficient conditions for something being counted as true. It's nothing like that. It's something like how truth works, or if you want a more detailed account of essence, and you've got this book, which you need to buy, and you look at the first footnote to the question concerning technology, you find a whole lot of talk about essence. And what he says is, what essence means is the way in which something pursues its course. I think that's just not as good as how it works. But maybe the most filled out version of essence would be how it installs and perpetuates itself. So when you're talking about the essentialization of truth, it's about how truth works, how it comes to be, how it perpetuates itself, how it pursues its course, all of those strange ways of talking, but not something that has nothing to do with essentialism, and therefore misleading word there. Okay, that's enough just to tell you things not to... I don't want to make life harder for you than necessary by the translator's way of doing things. Now, we're going to go back and talk about the most important stuff going on in the origin of the work of art. And that is the way that some being in the clearing establishes the truth in the clearing. And mainly, I want to distinguish I want to make a whole lot of distinctions that Heidegger doesn't make, that I think are implicit in his examples and in what he's talking about. So first I want to make a big distinction between articulation and reconfiguration. I talked about this at the end last time. And I'm going to spell out what they are. I think Heidegger, in a very confusing and misleading way, starts out with examples of articulation, like the temple and the cathedral, and ends up, in a hurry, but very important, telling you about something quite different, the reconfiguration. And the way you can see that it must be quite different is, by the end, he's talking about a leap, a shock, a new history beginning. And if you think, the Greek temple and the medieval cathedral just aren't a leap and a shock and a new history beginning. They are something else. So, sorry, I keep drinking this because I will cough otherwise. Better see me drinking all the time and coughing all the time. So, what they are, that is the Greek temple and the medieval cathedral, are a certain kind of articulation. I think there are two kinds of articulation to be distinguished. So I'm if you sort of, if I wrote it on the board, I would want to say, so the big category is truth setting itself to work, and then the two big subcategories are articulation and reconfiguration. And under articulation now is subcategory 1, which, just for fun, we could call glamorizing. It is taking the current style and making it shine, making such a superly powerful and clear exemplar of it that you can see everything in terms of that, in the light of that, and so forth. And that's where the Greek temple and the medieval cathedral come in. This is kind of review because we've talked a lot about that early on in the book, in the article. So that's how Kant articulates Descartes. Descartes has this new way of seeing things, but Kant puts it together and says to people, that's the Enlightenment. We're in the Enlightenment. This is what it means when we take over everything as subjects, and that's who we are. We're the people in the Enlightenment. And Marilyn Monroe glamorizes feminine practices and becomes a shining exemplar of what it is to be feminine in the culture. These are not all equally big. I mean, she's obviously not redefining the understanding of being in the culture. She's doing it on a small scale for the subworld of feminine erotic attraction. But in all of these, something extraordinary comes to the surface and something ordinary is thrust down. Now that's a little bit peculiar because that's also the basic characteristic of reconfiguring, and therefore it's confusing. But it means something different in these two cases. So first let me explain what I think it means when something extraordinary comes to the surface and the ordinary is thrust down in the case of articulating that we've just been talking about. Well, yeah, okay. In all kinds of articulating, this happens. It's on 66 he's talking about it. He talks about how the more simple does the thrust come into the open that the work is, in the middle of the page, and the more essentially is the extraordinary thrust to the surface and the long familiar thrust down. Now what is that? That means lots of different things, and even different things under the two forms of articulation, and it means another thing under reconfiguring, I think. That's what makes it so hard to see how these are all different. So far, you can just think of Marilyn Monroe as making sort of extraordinary erotic beauty come to the surface and making most of the women look ordinary. The ordinary is thrust down. And in all these shining things, when they shine, you look unhappy with this, very unhappy. Well, you have to tell me why in a minute, right away, really. But just when you think. So I think when any of these things shine, then then sort of the banal ordinary begins to look banal and ordinary and is thrust down in the light of this powerful example. You don't like that?
Well, I thought that what we had said before was that Marilyn Monroe typified or brought out a certain kind of sense of style of feminine beauty. And one of the things it did was show men how to be attracted to other women, not just to Marilyn Monroe. They didn't all just become
Right. But I don't mean that they stayed plain. I mean, they look plain till they catch up with her, is what I was thinking. I mean, she gives them a new way of looking, and then they all imitate that as best they can in their own way, take up that style, and then relate to them each, not to her.
But, okay, it makes them sound like they're sort of in the shadows until they bring themselves into the light, rather than that she's shining light on everybody.
Oh, I see. Well, she's shining a light on everybody, but then how do you, how does the Greek temple and cathedral, let's go back to them, make the extraordinary come to the surface and thrust down the ordinary? This isn't what we were talking about this morning, obviously, which is a whole new, different thing.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure that one out.
I guess I'm not
Maybe
totally
we shouldn't
convinced
apply
that
it
this
to
phrase applies
to that.
this kind of...
Okay. Well,
I don't know.
good. Well, one other possibility, and maybe Liz is right, is to say that they're not in the business of making the extraordinary come to the surface and thrusting down the ordinary. If not, and I don't know, I'll leave that open, you could think about it and discuss it. But if they're not, what would that look like? Well, Liz has a good feel for the phenomenon for this one, and we talked about it this morning. And it's in any case where you get a work of art, what happens is what the work of art lights up gets to be banal and rigid, like Christianity did, and probably Greek religion too, and the Hebrew religion certainly, and then the Hebrew prophets come along and call people back to their original covenant with God. Or Christianity gets to be all institutional and hierarchical in the Middle Ages, and then Luther comes along and says it's really about love and imitating Jesus. You've forgotten what it is. Now, this is a second kind of articulation. These are the preservers. They renew the style, the understanding of being, which naturally runs down. And there, the extraordinary comes to the surface and the ordinary is thrust down in a way that Liz likes. Right? Yeah.
And one of the other things is the earth sort of gets more, if things have been tilting more toward the worldly aspect, toward the clear and consistent and complete, then the earthly aspect gets paid more attention to, or sort of...
Good. Yes, if everything has become so worked out that everybody's got Christianity all done in completely hierarchical, detailed casualty and so forth, and there's nothing, it's become clear, it's become coherent, it's stretched to cover every detail of medieval life. The earth is getting pretty well eclipsed, and then Luther comes along and says, no, you've forgotten what's hidden and mysterious and awesome and extraordinary behind all this world, and the earth comes back through. All of this is being talked about on page 66. Let me go on. And maybe the fact that it's all in one paragraph, well, it certainly means it's all about articulating. But whether there are two kinds here, see, what puzzles me is you can't think of the Greek temple and the cathedral as in the business of preserving, or Kant, or Marilyn Monroe. They're in the business of shining and glamorizing. And then there are these people, the prophets and Luther, and I had another example, the President of the United States, if he were a really good president, would speak on, say, the 4th of July, and he would Lincoln did it in the Gettysburg Address. The Gettysburg Address is a perfect example of somebody who renews an understanding of the Constitution and the American way of life and what the point of it is that people had forgotten. And then they hear the president's address or read it, then they feel a new clarity about their identity and how important it is, and solidarity with the we that's been articulated. That's certainly preserving. Now, there's a paragraph about it, all here on 66, and I don't know how it all fits together, so I'll just read it. I started with that we thrust, the long familiar gets thrust down and the extraordinary to the surface. Now, Liz may be right. The long familiar sounds like this banalized, rigidified surface. So maybe this is all about the second kind of articulating, namely the preserving. But let's go on. That this multiple thrusting is nothing violent, but the more purely the work is itself transported into the openness of beings, an openness opened by itself, the more simply does it transport us into this openness, at the same time transport us out of the realm of the ordinary. To submit to this displacement means to transform our custom ties to the world and earth, to restrain all doing and prizing, knowing and looking in order to stay within the truth that's happening in the work. Only the restraint of this staying lets what is created be the work that it is. This letting of the work be a work we call the preserving of the work. It is only such preserving that the work yields itself in its createdness as actual, and so forth. So I think whatever it is, then my story is articulation is both glamorizing, and we've talked about that, and Heidegger talks a lot about that, and then it's preserving, and he talks about that, and he doesn't clearly distinguish them, but I think they have to be distinguished, and they're both fine. Yeah.
Can you say why we can't consider the Greek temple and the cathedral as preserving?
Well, if preserving, and this is your line, renews and recalls us to something which we already had clear that we're losing track of, they don't seem to do it, particularly the Greek temple. It doesn't point back to anything that was already clear. It got it clear.
Well, let me put the question the other way then. Why do we consider the renewing ones to be the preserving ones?
It seems so obvious to me. I'm stumped for a minute. It seems to me the preservers are the people who, it's so obvious I don't have to say it. Let me just say it over. I mean, there's something that the temple articulates and lights up, and it has to do that before there can be people who. Well, let's go to Jesus. Jesus. Well, no, he's a reconfigurer. That will complicate. Let's stick to the temple. The temple lights up and organizes a Greek style. Now it looks to me like once that's done, then people can come around and preserve it by constantly returning us to it and so forth. How we could say that it was preserving it before it had
before there was
done
a
it.
danger of it
Right,
not being
right,
preserved.
that's right. And before it had actually pulled the it together enough to be an it. Yeah.
So there's something specifically reactionary about preservers.
Well, yeah, reactionary in a good sense.
Right.
Conservative in a good sense. I mean, if in the sense that Lincoln was conservative and so forth, it is a very sort of. Well, and it's very, very bad to put it that way, though, because Heidegger says it looks revolutionary. In fact, he talks about it in Basic Problems. And calls it revolutionary. And when you renew it, or say Martin Luther King, another example. When you renew the idea of Christian love and justice for the black people, it looks practically like Civil War. It's so revolutionary. And yet he clearly was saying, I'm recalling you to what is basic to your identity and the Constitution and Christianity, two of the defining things we've got. So you could call him conservative and revolutionary both.
I guess it's what you should all already know anyway. It's
part of your identity that you've lost touch with. These people call you back in touch with what is already part of your identity and your style, only it's become dispersed, it's become banal, and so forth.
In that sense, it seems like your instance with Luther works particularly well because he never thought the breach would be permanent. Like he always thought the breach would end.
He was fixing the church. Good, right. And he never thought of himself as a reconfigurer, starting a new history, but fixing the church the way the prophets were trying to fix the Hebrews when they got off track. Right. And Luther himself, who knows what he would have done, but it's an interesting case. With Luther around, who should come along but Descartes, who did turn it into a case of reconfiguring and start a whole new understanding of the world where subjects replaced God. I mean, it's something Luther certainly didn't have in mind.
But Descartes didn't have that in mind either.
No,
right?
okay, right. But Descartes had it a lot more in mind than Luther.
He was more on the edge.
Right, and Kant finally really articulated it. Which kind of articulation did Kant do? He's back, that's right, in the first bunch. He didn't say, I'll return you to the identity and understanding you had in Descartes. He said, I'm going to glamorize and make Descartes shine so much that you're all going to want to be enlightened people. Okay, I saw another hand back here. Didn't I? Yeah.
I don't see why temple, it might not function like Luther does, and like, you know, all of a sudden, sort of flood in the style once again. But it may glamorize it first, but can it become a preserver? I mean, isn't that why the temple is there, so people can go back to the temple and remind themselves of what the style is? I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have the temple to begin. I mean, like, you wouldn't need to go to the temple.
I think, let me try another angle here. I think he wants to distinguish creators and preservers. Creators are the people who make the temple, or who set up a new state and so forth, who pull it together. But the people who are, I mean, it's people who are preservers, not the Greek temple. Is that right? Yeah, it's people who are preservers. And the people who are preservers are not the people who built the Greek temple, because those are called creators. Where creators, remember, have got to be understood as receivers. So they're the creator receivers, the ones who are so open to the practices and able to let the practices, it's all really on the side of the practices, cohere in this shining, exemplary way. And then there are other people called preservers, and they do something else, I think. They do this thing we're trying to describe, re-articulate and renew. I mean, I think these distinctions are not very clear in here. That's the point. He's just sort of found a bunch of phenomena, and he hasn't got them all untangled. But I'm untangling them. And if you think when I do it that I finally sort of go against anything he would want to hold, then tell me I'm wrong. Or even if I go against the text. But if I'm saying more than he ever said, that's all right. I'm articulating. So now let's see now. Okay, so far? Well, then we make the big leap. Excuse the Heidegger expression here. That would only confuse you. Forget that. We're going on to reconfiguring. They do make a big leap, but that's not perhaps the moment to say so. Okay, now, in the reconfiguring, there also seems to be two. I'm now ad-libbing. This isn't in my notes explicitly, but it's in my notes implicitly. There seems to be the very special case of the beginning of the whole thing, which sets up history in the first place. And that was the pre-Socratics in the Greek temple, where for the first time, anywhere in the galaxy, as far as anybody knows, there was this idea that there was a unified understanding of being that covered everything, and could be organized into these, all-covering paths, all-encompassing paths, all-encompassing story. And so there's a kind of reconfiguring which sets up our historical world for the first time. And that's not, though, I think, the important one. For one thing, it only happens once. And I think Heidegger thinks reconfiguring happens several times. And the other one is setting up a new world, where, as in his phrase, this isn't me, history begins again. So there's history begins, and that's one subclass, and nothing special to be said about that. It just happens that way. But it isn't any different than when history begins again, I think, and Heidegger has lots to say about what happens when history begins again. Or better put it, no, that's not the best way to put it. He has lots to say about a structure which happens both when history begins and, of course, happens again whenever history begins again. It's the same structure. It's the structure I'm calling reconfiguring. Now, there's a lot to be said about that. I need to explain a lot about how it is a shock and a leap, and exactly how it works in its shocking, leaping sort of way. It founds a new world, he says, on 75. And that could be either for the first time or again. Where is this? On 75. Oh, sorry. I need to say one more thing and then I'll read it. By the way, things get so dense at the end there that I don't know about you, but I suspect you too. Practically, I got every sentence underlined and every word circled. It's just amazing. And we're leaving out language, which further complicates it all, because we're going to come back to language. It's better to have one track. So what happens? A new world is founded, and that's the thing I wanted to stress. So if you look on 75, you see him saying in the top paragraph, never mind the art is poetry. Just let it be whatever it is. I mean, temples will do fine and statesmen will do fine. There's no reason for us yet to make language privileged. And how he does that is so fast, I don't know how he does it at all. But we get the founding of truth. And here we understand founding, this is the importance, in a triple sense. Founding is bestowing, founding is grounding, and founding is beginning. Look at that next sentence. Founding, however, is actual only in preserving. Oh, that's all right. Thus, to each mode of founding there corresponds a mode of preserving. I guess I like that. I mean, this is very puzzling. What I would like to say is, gee, it's complicated. Boy, that's a complicated new thing. When I read that this morning, thinking about it, I thought, great. You're going to get a story about founding, which is about reconfiguring, and you're going to get that to any reconfiguring there corresponds a mode of preserving, and that's going to be about articulating. And that might still be right, I'm not sure. But if it is right, then we're going to have to find the same three aspects for preserving, which would be renewing, in my understanding, as we find for starting. And I'm not sure you can, but and Liz is looking worried, aren't you? But if it isn't, then maybe he's right. The preserving is, the Greek temple is preserving. Well, not the Greek temple maybe, but whatever this stuff is. I don't think the Greek temple, I think, is not a preserving thing. But I'm not sure. Here's a paper topic. Figure out how he uses preservers in this essay, and then I'll steal from it. Okay, let me try without preserving first, because I think I do understand that. Now, so we've got founding in three dimensions. I don't know whether it dawned on you or not, but these three dimensions are the past, present, and future, and it helps to hold on to that. And it helps to figure out which is which. And it's a little hard to figure out which is which, because everything is so convoluted. But I think it's pretty clear that bestowing is the present, grounding is the past, and beginning is the future. And I want to say something about each of them and read you passages where that's going on. So, to begin with, you've got to do something. You're going to make central, and this is all my reading of it, about the marginal practices. I'm going to get to why I think it's all right to talk about marginal practices in a minute, but first I have to just talk about them. You're going to make central, taken for granted, marginal things. What? Oh, sorry, I'm just misreading. You make what is now central and taken for granted marginal, and you bring in something new. I don't have to use the word marginal practices yet. I don't want to. I think that is marginal practices. But all we say so far is you make something central, you make something new central, and you put aside what's been taken for granted. Yeah.
How does that differ from thrusting down the ordinary and up the...
Well, I said you could use the same phrase for both. I realize that. You have to fill it in differently, it seems to me, if you're going to talk about the articulators, which I think are the preservers, so I'm a little shaken up about that. But anyway, there is going to be a way in which, say, Luther puts down the ordinary, what has become banal, what has become all world, and the way the bestowing does, because what the bestowing is going to do is not put it down by recalling you to what was already there as the original identity, but by bringing in something altogether new. Okay? Good. Keep asking me this, because it's very hard to keep this all clear. So I'm on 75, the middle paragraph. The setting into work of truth thrusts up the unfamiliar. Another translation says awesome. I don't know what the German is. Unheimlich, maybe. But in any case, the translation is different, for better or for worse, in the one you're reading, in the basic writings, than the one in here. And I don't have any strong feeling about which is better. But they're often different, and it's illuminating. I was looking at the English and the German, and looking at the two Englishes, and they just say different things here. So it thrusts up the unfamiliar, or awesome, and extraordinary. That's probably the awesome part. Let's leave it the way it is here. Thrusts up the unfamiliar and extraordinary, and at the same time down thrusts down the ordinary and what we believe to be such. The truth that discloses itself in the work can never be proved or derived from what went before. What went before is refuted in its exclusive reality by the work. I mean, that's very important in this discussion with Liz. It's hard to say that Luther refutes Christianity. And he does refute, well, yeah, period. Let's just, what art founds can therefore never be compensated and made up by what is already present and available, founding as an overthrow and endowing a bestowal. You see, that's where bestowal comes in. And that's one of the modes of founding. Yeah.
Can you say why the word bestowal makes sense as a name for this?
Not really. That's interesting. I have no feel for that whatsoever. Nobody's brought the German. I wish I'd brought the German.
You got those words for extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's Gefreite and Freude.
Okay, and do you know the word for bestowal?
No, I don't have that.
That's what Liz wants now. I don't know. I think I should go back and look. You have it with you, Ben?
I have the German.
Oh, great. Because it's so unintuitive. What has it got in there? Has it got bestowal in?
Sorry, I am for
Yeah, I can try.
We were right near the end. You know, we're say 2 pages. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4 pages in from the end.
Before the other
Probably the paragraph before is the one to spot. The nature of art is poetry. Anybody else got basic writings?
Yeah,
You found it yet? It is bestowal. Okay, never mind, Liz. He's found it. Okay, well, it certainly is. We'll hope that we can find something better. Horace will find something better. But in the meantime, I don't know. It's a good question. But one thing is sure, the ordinary gets wiped out. He talks about that more on 72. About 5 lines down. In the midst of what is, art breaks open an open place. See, again, that does sound much more dramatic than Luther. And in whose openness everything is other than usual, by virtue of the projected sketch set into the work of the unconcealedness of what is, which casts itself towards everything ordinary and hitherto existing becomes an unbeing. There you've got it. You can't think that this is the same as the articulator. None of these people we talked about would take all that was hitherto existing and make it an unbeing. Jesus does, maybe. Remember my example at the end, when you say obeying the Sabbath, obeying the law, keeping the 10 Commandments, all of that doesn't matter. When you say that, you really make everything that's been up to now an unbeing. You say, well, it still happens, but it's not important. It's not essential to our identity at all. Yes, what'd you find for it?
Well, it's überfließ, or overflowing, which is understandable, but then there's only one other German word, not two words. So it's Schenkung, which would be gift.
Gift, an overflowing gift.
Well, no, it's not an adjective.
It's a gift and
gift.
it's an overflowing and a gift. Is that any better than a bestowing?
For bestowing?
Yeah, that's for bestowing.
I like, for bestowing. A gift. I like a gift.
Like giving.
A giving.
Because it's Schenkung.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It doesn't help much, but
It's more of a feel.
yeah, it's a better feel. Okay, and so the ordinary is wiped out. That is very extreme. And as I say, the Hebrew example is a good one. The law becomes irrelevant. That's pretty extreme. So, for instance, just again, you have this phenomenon. Don't forget it from last time. That we're now in the middle of reconfiguring. Jesus is a terrific reconfigurer, and now we're seeing why in detail. He's making the law irrelevant. It was once a crucial question of avoiding guilt. That's what Paul said it was all about. Now it turns out there's no way to avoid guilt. It's all about forgiveness and love. And everything has been really radically switched around. And that's the one dimension of it, the present. The present, that's what happens. Now, how does it happen? Well, it takes up something from the past. That's the grounding part. It has to, somehow, where does it come from, this new thing that has put down everything that's ordinary and made it into an unbeing? Well, that's where I have to say marginal practices. I mean, something is, now I'm going to try to argue for that. There's got to be something around which were possibilities not taken seriously as essential and crucial to who we are and what our identity is, to think of the Hebrews, but still possibilities that this reconfigurer can latch onto, or he'll be completely unintelligible. Yeah.
Well, so in this, you are saying, right, that he might be totally unintelligible, but he does use this word leap. And I'm really interested in you pinning down where you can get the notion of marginal practices when Heidegger is continuously saying that the familiar, the ordinary are totally put down. In fact, he says stop, uses the word non-husband, no longer, and then you have this leap. So where are the texts which would indicate that there might be something, anything left?
Okay, I've got a story, of course, about the leap. But Forrest is right. Whatever story I tell, it's got to do justice to the fact that this is a leap and it's unmediated. I'm sure you would have said that next. Unmediated, there's no transition there. Now, how can we have that and yet hold on to the idea, which I want to hold on to, and I'll try to convince you of, that it's not just out of nowhere that he starts doing something new. I mean, I don't think a reconfigurer can march in, say, Jesus, and start preaching Buddhism, because he would really be, in my understanding of it, just strictly unintelligible. He wouldn't connect up with anything. Now, I used to worry about this, and now I'm sort of locked into my solution after years. My solution to this is there will be trivial things in the practices that aren't even worth, putting down and turning into a non-being because people are not paying any attention to them one way or the other. These trivial, which I'm calling marginal possibilities, are not like the ordinary, banal, which is being put down, all right. They're not even ordinary and banal. They're really just marginal and trivial. Those are what he's going to have to draw on, I think. That's all he's got to draw on. I'm trying to convince you that he's drawing on something here. Remember I said in the Jesus example, there is some sense about desire, that you shouldn't covet your neighbor's property, stuff, whatever, but you don't find them worrying much about that. You don't find them saying, good grief, I coveted this and I couldn't help it and I was trying to obey the law and here's this thing I keep thinking about what a great car my neighbor has. It doesn't seem to bother people. But it's enough to hook onto when Jesus decides that he can, and when he can say you commit adultery when you lust after somebody in your heart, he's obviously drawing on their sense that there is such a thing as bad desires. So let me try now to give you as much as I can evidence for this. But I guess I should address Forrest right away anyway, though I was going to save it. But he's asking, how could this be an unmediated leap? Because it looks like if it was unmediated in a leap, there'd have to be nothing going across this leap and this nothing mediating it. And I'm saying there is the marginal practices. Well, when I hear leap and unmediated, I think of a Gestalt switch, a revolution in which a leap from the wings to center stage is a phrase that Nietzsche uses at one point. Something which was in the wings, just trivial and unnoticed, now becomes the most important thing in the culture. And what was the most important thing in the culture now becomes trivial. That's a big enough leap, it seems to me, and unmediated enough to do the job that we want here. I don't think, if he means anything stronger, then I don't get it. Because, anything stronger than that, it seems to me, would make him too unintelligible. He's pretty unintelligible. So take Jesus. People don't understand what he's up to. He tells all these parables. They repeat the parables and they follow him because he's charismatic. But he doesn't understand very well what he's up to. How many seen the Scorsese movie, The Last Temptation? You should if you get a chance, because one of the fascinating things about the movie, two fascinating things about the movie, you see the really loony marginal practices around, not the desiring ones, which I'm stressing, but the farthest out ones, namely the Essenes. They're waiting for the end of the world out in the wilderness, fasting and lost to they're no longer part of the Hebrew culture. They're out in nowhere. And anyway, but you see the one that there are these weird possibilities that the Messiah is about to come. And you see Jesus not knowing what he's going to say next. Whenever he opens his mouth, he looks as surprised as everybody else at what comes out, because he's pretty unintelligible. But on the other hand, it seems to me it's intelligible enough, one, that people don't think he's just completely crazy, and secondly, it can be articulated by Paul, who goes around with a great deal of effort and full time making it intelligible. Yeah.
An example of this word. How about the notion of loving your enemy, which is one of the big deals? I want to say I do not understand that that is a marginal practice in any sense in the Hebrews.
I think that's right.
But that's the leap that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Because we know what it means to be an enemy, and we know what it means to love, but it's not a marginal practice that we love the enemy, and yet it's intelligible.
Well, I don't know. I bet it wasn't intelligible right off, any more than God's being crucified were intelligible right off.
Intelligible in the sense that it's not something that we cannot make some sort of evaluation or judgment about, i.e., for the Greeks, this is utter nonsense, to be sure. So they could make sense of it. It's just nonsense. It's intelligible, but not something any right-minded person would go about doing.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is that's not a marginal practice that's brought forth. It is clearly a total leap, something utterly, completely different than anyone had thought about ever before, and yet it's intelligible.
Well, I'm gonna say something, and I'm gonna let all of you talk about it. I wanted to say something like, but it's interesting. Somehow there is a difference between how the Greeks would hear it, which is absolutely unintelligible somehow, and the way the Hebrews got it, which was, yeah, we never. I mean, that isn't how we thought about it at all. We love to kill our enemies, but yeah, we can see that. But I don't know how. So there are degrees of unmediatedness and unintelligibility. Let other people say something about it. Yeah.
Forgiveness is accepted for the Hebrews, so it just seems like taking forgiveness to the extreme.
Well, is forgiveness accepted as part of the... Mostly you're not supposed to do bad things and need to be forgiven, and when you do bad things you're supposed to, I suppose, what's the word? When you... restitution or something. That's not quite the word. Expiation or something. Just forgiveness out of the goodness and love of... That's another weird Jesus idea. But maybe you're right. There's enough forgiveness in there somewhere that he could connect with it. Boy, everybody has something to say now. You want to say something? Yeah.
I was going to say that I think Jesus did love his enemies during his life, but it wasn't. That might have been his marginal practice. While he was doing that during his life, that might have been a marginal practice. But once he was crucified and resurrected, I think that's like a proprietary event to like open up this new world. But before then, it was marginal practice, at least within Jesus and his disciples, to love his enemies. So
no, but that's not the question Forrest is asking. Was it a practice already in the margin of the Hebrews that they could latch on to?
Well, wasn't everybody a Hebrew before?
They were all Hebrews before, but where did they get this? I mean, that's the question.
They got it from Jesus. They got it from following Jesus during his life.
And where did Jesus get it? Did he get it out of some aspect of the Hebrew he was before? That's what Forrest is asking. Yeah, and the answer, and my story would have to be, well, if you look around somewhere, you'll find it, or you'll find enough other stuff that is there. Yeah, Liz.
One tack I might take is there is the love thy neighbor is an injunction, or that you have a responsibility to the neighbor, and then the enemy is sort of the further extension of the
subclass.
neighbor.
That's how I was going to deal with it, but I was letting other people talk first. I would have said, yeah, love and forgiveness are certainly big things, and they're very new things, but they're not totally unheard of in the Hebrew story. And now you extend love and forgiveness even to your enemies, and even to your criminals, and that's certainly a big move, but maybe it's not a total change. Yeah?
It seems important what you said, that Jesus couldn't just come out and start preaching Buddhism to the Hebrews, because it would be such a radical break.
Yeah, that would be a real unmediated leap of the extremist sort.
It's impossible to have a completely unmediated changeover.
Okay. Well, you've all got enough interesting things in the air, and Forrest was good to raise it, because now at least you'll see why I've picked the passages I'm about to read you in my attempt to say he knows that there is stuff around, and it's going to be those marginal stuff that he's going to use when he reconfigures. The bottom 60. He says, truth is untruth insofar as there belongs to it the reservoir of the not yet uncovered, the ununcovered, in the sense of concealment. Now, I don't know what is not yet uncovered and ununcovered, but there's a reservoir I want to stress. There's something out of which, which is not yet central not part of the world of the Hebrews, which is still around to be tapped into, is the story. And what could it be? That's a reservoir that's not part of the world of the Hebrews, and it's because it's earth, and yet it's something that can be used. I mean, a reservoir is something used. And now I think those are the reservoir is this collection of other possibilities. But who knows? I'm going to give you my attempt on page 75. Okay, now I'm going to go about 10 lines from the bottom, or 12. In the work, truth is thrown toward the coming preservers, that is, toward an historical group of men. That's nice. Those preservers are the kind I like. What is thus cast forth is never an arbitrary demand. Now, we've got to get something. It's a leap. It's unmediated, but it's not arbitrary. That's what we're trying to figure out. Genuine poetic projection is and that's just reconfiguring for us, is the opening up of a disclosure of that into which human being as historical is already cast. Well, what is this already in there? I mean, if that seems there's something already there, which is a reservoir. This is the story I want to make, and that's the grounding part. And that's the earth part that you can use. And on 76, the end of the first full paragraph. Poetic projection comes from nothing in this respect, that it never takes its gift from the ordinary and traditional. Now, we all agree about that. That's the banal, that's the dominant, that's the taken for granted. But it never comes from nothing. I think this is very important. I mean, that with the Buddha story, it would come from nothing. But but it never comes from nothing in that what is projected by it is only the withheld vocation of the historical being of man himself. Well, I don't know quite what that phrase means. I mean, maybe Forrest does. But I take it that means that the Hebrews had this possibility in them. Their vocation was that they could be flipped into Christians.
Well, I'm sorry, yeah, the possibility certainly has to be there and has to be intelligible somehow. But for example, on that, I'm sorry, Bert, I don't know where you are, but on that first passage I was trying to look up, there is no reservoir there in German.
Let's hear about it.
Exist. It's the realm of the not yet, and he simply poetically translating that as reservoir.
Well, I'm not sure that bothers me all that much. So let's go back. 65 means the realm of the not yet. If that means anything at all, I can see why he's. It's.
But that's not reservoir.
I thought it was. I wrote down it's the Herkunftsbereich. Is that the German?
Herkunftsbereich, yeah.
Okay, I would have said that that's the Herkunft is something like the tradition or the heritage. It's isn't that the word for heritage?
Herkunft.
Erbe is heritage.
More like source. Yeah.
So it's the sort of.
Erbe is heritage.
Yeah, but it's the Herkunft is something.
The source of the not yet, that the unrevealed. So it's simply saying it's a possibility. Well, how do we know that? Because it now is.
Yeah, but I mean, good. But I mean, but it isn't coming out. I mean, he's willing to admit enough mediation as to say, if it now is, then it was already possible in some sense, not just empty. I presume. I mean, you wouldn't bother to say anything. I mean, if it was a complete leap out of nowhere, and it now is, it wouldn't be very illuminating to say, of course, it was possible, since after all, it now is. I think that's somehow what makes it possible. Yeah.
I'm worried from the quotes you just read, the
Okay.
other extreme. I mean,
Okay.
I don't think Heidegger believes this,
Yeah.
but that it's never that it's not an arbitrary command, that into which the human being in the historical past is already thrust, and the withheld vocation of what historical man already is. I'm
Right.
worried that there's some kind of
Too much.
Yeah,
Too
Hegelian.
Hegelian. Too much of a telos. Well, it is a bad way for him to put it. We'd have to look at that German. But I mean, what I would do with it in a hurry to fix it would be to say, once it's done, that's how it looks. I mean, once you've taken it, that's sort of like the possibility story. Once you've taken, in my story, the marginal practices. I mean, think of it this way. I mean, if it's a regestalting phenomenon, when you've got one of these puzzles where can you see the face of the cat in the trees, and you can't, and then all of a sudden you can regestalt the cat in the trees, well then you have to think the cat has been in the trees all along. You can't even go back and look at them without seeing it that way. So I guess that's what I think happens. You go back and you see that the whole point of being Hebrews was to lead up to being Christians. It certainly didn't look that way until Jesus came along. Let me try one more. 76. Now, have I read that one already? No, yes, it doesn't come from nothing. I've done it. And the crucial passage, I say, is still on 76. Oh, yeah. Well, this is the passage that Forrest and I are arguing about. So let's read it. Bestowing and grounding have in themselves the unmediated character of what we call a beginning. Yet this unmediated character of the beginning, the peculiarity of a leap out of the unmediable, does not exclude, but rather includes the fact that the beginning prepares itself for the longest time and wholly inconspicuously. How do you deal with that? That's my marginal practice story. I mean, something's been leading up to this leap and this unmediated thing.
As long as you don't read that in a Hegelian way.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. But no, I certainly don't. It's very un-Hegel to say that in a completely unintelligible way, well, that's the wrong way to put it, I mean, that there's no reason why these marginal practices should become central, already there, that you can appeal to. It's a Kuhnian. Now we can make a Kuhnian point. You can't say to the Aristotelian, look, it's a natural thing to go on and to be Galileo and Copernicus. There are bits of stuff in Aristotle that you can use, perhaps. They talk a lot about his view about missiles and the problems he had with rocks that were catapulted and stuff. But generally, that was very marginal. You can't say that there was some basic problem in the Hebrews and a natural sort of solution, and Jesus found it. That's not Kuhnian enough. This has got to be a revolution. It's got to be something that is not recognized. That's another way to put it. By the people who don't want it. They don't have. This is a good way to put it. It's not so Hegelian and rational that if you don't want it, if the Hebrews don't want it, they're being irrational and stubborn about it. It's so different that you can't prove to them that they should become Christians. That would be mediation. That would be Hegel. Let me get this clearer. For Hegel, you see that the next stage solves the problems of the previous stage and grows out of the previous stage, preserves the truth of the previous stage, and dumps the error of the previous stage. And no rational person could possibly stay in the previous stage once they see that. But surely we're not supposed to think that no rational person who's a Hebrew, once they see what Jesus is up to, have to say, oh, yes, that solves our problems, and that's implicit in what we're doing, and that's just the point of it. I see that now. That if they do see it, then they will say that. That's where we've been heading all along. That's what Matthew spends his time saying. But if they don't see it, they don't have to. They can say, this is just a crazy. One of the Essenes got loose, and we aren't going to follow this at all. Yeah.
The other problem you might run into with the marginal practices is that it gives the creator too much say, too much dignity, i.e. there is this person somehow in the culture who grabs a hold of these and lets them shine forth, as opposed to this notion of leap, that if you were to say that somehow the creator is the one who is grabbed by the practice, that would work better too. But it strikes me that...
Well, that's what I want to say, of course. He's receptive. Remember, I said he's receptive to the practices and to the new unity that's being formed in the practices. Remember this distinction between Schaffen and Schöpfen. Schaffen is creating in the sense of producing and making something. Schöpfen is drawing something up as from a well. And I want to say the creator is a kind of vacuum and draws up from as a well these the marginal practices which are around. Yeah.
But there has to be more than one way for them to be drawn up.
Right.
Because otherwise you get...
Absolutely, you'd be back to Hegel again.
Right.
There are lots of marginal practices and lots of ways that never get developed that you could have done it. You could have, I suppose, started a cult where they were all going to commit suicide to help the end of the world come along, for instance. And somebody could have come along and brought that Essene idea, pushed it. But so there must be there were all kinds of prophets, of course. It's a good time preaching all kinds of crazy marginal things, presumably. And Jesus was just one more prophet preaching what looked like one more crazy marginal thing until his thing took off and shined and got a lot of people believing in it. Yeah.
Again, this looks like a general notion where Heidegger says the end is always in the beginning. So you have the integrity of the whole thing there already in some sense. So sure, those possibilities have to be there, but
Okay, wait, that's a different thing, I think. The end is in the beginning, which you hear a lot about in basic questions, so we could talk about that, is once you've got a new reconfiguring, then I take it a lot is going to have to be, that will work itself out, and the people in it will, how, it's not Hegelian, because I think it could have broken down earlier, or a new leap could have happened, but certain possibilities are there that now can be exploited given this new beginning. I mean, in a certain way, I think he thinks somehow Protestantism was made possible as soon as Jesus came along. Not that it was necessary, he's very clear about that, or inevitable. But in that sense, the end is in the beginning, I think.
But the end, for example, I think Heidegger would say already in the pre-Socratics the possibility or even the likelihood, something of the sort, of technology is already there.
Okay, that's a big deal, different story. We'll get to that with basic questions and with the technology ethic.
So
there's a certain way.
Marginal practices, I think, could be understood that way, where those possibilities are there.
Well, I don't know what to say about that yet, because there's such a funny thing going on in basic questions, but I guess I should mention it while you have. Basic questions is about the beginning of a whole way of understanding things in the West, which goes through a lot of very radical changes, but which is something that nonetheless goes through all the changes, a very special thing. I mean, you see, what could that be? Namely, that there's a unified understanding of being. Once you've got a unified understanding of being, and once you've forgotten something crucial about it, which I am not going to talk about yet, the basic problems is about what the pre-Socratics knew that we don't know, and what the pre-Socratics don't know that Heidegger does know. And so it's very important that once you've got some amazing insight about this unity, and an amazing lack of, or a not surprising lack of understanding of a certain fact about this unity, then this whole culture isn't necessarily going to follow, but you can see how one possibility would be that we end up here in technology. That's for later in the course. I'm really getting worried that I'm not even going to be able to finish this, and I'm not going to come back to this, so let me go on. We've got Earth. I just read this, what I hope is a crucial passage, though it caused all kinds of trouble. This business, something prepares itself for the longest time and inconspicuously. And again, I don't know, I take that from my marginal story. But let me go on to the beginning now, because we need the third one. What happens in the beginning? Well, that's the easiest one, and Forrest just moved us to that one. Something is now set up, a world in which certain possibilities of development and of possible articulations are all in place. So, and it's projected, well, let's look at, I'll read some passages. 76, at the bottom. The beginning, the bottom paragraph, always contains the undisclosed abundance of the unfamiliar and extraordinary, which means that it contains strife with the familiar and the ordinary. Well, that's short. It sets up this new world, and that's going to put down the banal and taken for granted. So it's the instigation of a strife of truth, founding as a beginning. Remember, history is the struggle over what the new paradigm means. So there's going to be a struggle over what the essential point of Jesus' life was. Is it love? Is it that the end of the world is near? Is it that we have no power of our own, and so forth? And there are all kinds of threads in it. And there's a struggle between the various branches that come out of Christianity as to what's essential. And it's the beginning of that history of conflict of interpretations, given over to the preservers. Here come the preservers again, as one would expect. Those are the ones sort of fighting over how to re-articulate it. The work, the third line in the last paragraph, I've read this already. The work is thrown towards the coming preservers, that is, toward a historical group of men. Good, it isn't a temple, you see. We're back to that again. And it makes on them not an arbitrary demand, and so forth. I read that, and that's the future, as these preservers struggle over it, and also as it struggles with being submerged into the ordinary, and the preservers have to keep it from that. And when all this happens, history starts over. This is on 77. at the first little paragraph. Whenever R happens, that is, whenever there's a beginning, this is, I'm reading about beginnings, a thrust enters history. History either begins or starts over again. Those are the two, remember, two kinds of reconfiguring, according to me. Now, finally we get to the big pun that's been in the background. This is certainly considered by Heidegger to be an originating leap. And that's a pun on Ursprung. He had this pun in his back pocket all along, which is now going to spring on us. The Ursprung is an originating leap, and it gets translated origin. But origin loses the joke. The origin is an Ursprung. It's an originating leap. It originates a new history. So now you read the title. The Ursprung of the Kunstwerk, of the work of art, means that the biggest, best work of art, when it's doing its most work of art thing, is originating a leap into a new history, or starting history, or starting a new history. And that's the punchline. This is on 75 also, all squunched in here. So much is happening. Where is that one? I don't see that one. Yeah, right. Originating leap? What did I just read? Where would I just read it? Where was I just reading?
You're on 77.
Okay, I don't know what, I think I made a mistake there. I mean, 77 is fine, and 78, let's look at that. That's where he does the Ursprung primal leap. So let's start at the bottom here of 77. Art lets truth originate, spring forth. Art, founding, preserving, and remember, founding is the, as I read it, these three functions when you start with reconfiguring. Preserving, I'm back thinking of some parallel thing which we'd have to work out, that I don't know what it is exactly, is the spring that leaps to the truth of what is in the work. To originate means to leap, and so forth. And I take leap there, as I've already said, to be regestalting, unmediated, but from margin to center. Okay, now, I've spent much longer on that than I wanted to. I want to talk about two other things, unless people insist on. I think we've exhausted that one. At least exhausted is too optimistic or pessimistic. We've said enough about it. There are two more things I want to talk about in the last 15 minutes. He mentions that all of this has behind it a new kind of causality, which I just want to mention, because it comes out every once in a while in what he says without ever getting very clearly thematized. Remember that the clearing, which is produced in one of these reconfigurings, a new clearing, holds sway, it gets translated sometime, or governs everything that goes on. But it governs it in a very peculiar and interesting way. I'll say it and then I'll read the nearest thing to the passage. I mean, it could govern it by some kind of determinism, and then you wouldn't have your freedom, but it doesn't do that. It could govern it by putting ideas in people's heads so that they freely did this or that. That's not what it's about either. It's not about objective causality nor about subjective causality. It's about governing causality or clearing causality. And what is that? Well, remember, the clearing determines what it makes sense to do. And since you're free to choose among a whole range of things, but not just any old things, from now on it will make sense, for instance, in modernity, to try to be as mature and get as much control of objects as you can as a subject. It no longer will make sense to stand in the wonder of things welling up like the pre-Socratics. It will no longer make sense, and when Christianity is really over, if it ever is, to ask what God's vocation for you is. So as the clearing changes, and when it totally changes, then a whole different range of things make sense. And we're caused in a certain way. We're governed by that, even though we're not determined, because you can choose among the things that make sense. And even though it's not your willful choice, this set of alternatives, this set of alternatives constrains you as a subject making willful choices. So all of this is packed into the middle of 72. The curious fact here is that the work in no way affects hitherto existing entities by causal connections. The working of the work does not consist in the taking effect of a cause. It lies in a change happening from out of the work, of the unconcealedness, and so forth. Well, that's this governing causality. He never wants to call it a cause. Call it government. But when you do philosophy, this is related to basic problems, because in basic problems, basic questions, he says philosophy doesn't do anything, doesn't make any better railroads or housing or do any science or solve any particular problems, doesn't do anything practical, doesn't have to do with praxis, which doesn't mean practices there, it means solving things, so forth. But nonetheless, it's the sovereign thing. That's because it's onto this higher form of causality, namely, it's going to understand what, and if it's really, if somebody's a real reconfigurer, they've got an immense amount of power, a much higher power than any of these powers that change things in the clearing. And if Heidegger, for instance, is a reconfigurer, which I think he thinks he is when he's writing basic questions anyway, that would mean that he's got a way of looking at things which will just transform what it makes sense to do for everybody, right out of the current technological way of thinking into some, or acting into some new way of acting. Let's see. I said that this is on page 5 of Basic Questions. Let's see what is on page 5. Well, it's about the middle of the page. Philosophical reflection has an effect, if it does, only mediatively, by making available new aspects for all comportment. That's changing what it makes sense to do. And new principles for all decisions. That's also what it makes sense to do. And so I'm just wanted to explain that. Okay, one more thing. I got 10 more minutes. This, up to now, should have been relatively clear what I've been saying. I hope it is, because we're going to go into real obscurity from here on. There's, in the background, constantly, never coming out very clearly, another Heidegger question, which is, how do art and truth work? I mean, he's telling you sort of a lot about how they work. I mean, he just told you the structure of reconfiguring and the structure of articulating. But he wants to know something like, but why is articulating possible? Why is reconfiguring possible? What makes it happen? What are the articulators and the reconfigurers tuned into or attuned to that makes it happen? And he asked this question on 86 in this, and refers you back to the first sentence. He says, art is considered, I'm in the middle now of 86, art is considered neither an area of cultural achievement nor an appearance of spirit. Oh, sorry, I was on the way to say something a minute ago that I didn't finish. Just back one notch. The reconfigurer, of course, has an incredible amount of freedom. I was just on the verge of saying that. The reconfigurer, because he can open up a whole new world, doesn't just have the choice between alternatives that make sense, but he has the freedom to found a new world in which whole different things make sense. That's the highest kind. But sorry about that. Now let me go back to 86. Okay, art is neither a cultural achievement nor an appearance of spirit. It belongs to the disclosure of appropriation, by way of which the meaning of being can also be defined. Every once in a while the word appropriation comes along, just out of nowhere, and yet Heidegger thinks that's his most important word. The word is Erreibnis. It seems to me something like this, a whole long story. Man and being each come into their own by relating to each other in this special way in which man creates and preserves understandings of being. And that happens, and this is the deepest thing that Heidegger's sort of constantly sort of trying to get a grip on. That happens because the practices have a tendency to gather. If the practices didn't have a tendency to get clearer, to become total, all of this wouldn't work. When the artist is responding to something, what he's really finally responding to is the tendency of the practices to gather so as to bring everything out in its own most. Now, he says in even the beginning that he's asking this question, but he hasn't answered it. He certainly never talks about it very explicitly. Where is that now? Where I just had on 86. On 86 he says, that this is something that see the first sentences of the epilogue. Okay, so we go to the first sentence of the epilogue, and it says, the foregoing reflections are concerned with the riddle of art. Remember, art is what makes the artist, and what makes art possible and what makes the work of art possible is this thing called art. Now, what is art? Well, he doesn't know. He can't claim to solve the riddle. And the riddle is sort of, what is it about the way the practices work that makes this whole story we've just been talking about happen? And as I say, it's something about his intuition that the practices tend to gather. I tried to think of an example of that, to bring things out into their own most. I can't do it with being, but I can do it with what happens with the gays in San Francisco. There are these marginal practices. People are gay, and they hide it, and then they show it a bit. And then they get together, and more they work out a lifestyle, and they get new equipment, and they get new identities, and they get a new an understanding of what human beings are all about, and what sexuality is all about. And all of this gets clearer and gets more organized and draws more people and more equipment and more functions of government and so forth into it. I think that Heidegger thinks that's the natural way practices tend to work. And that is what he's trying to get at, I think, with their rightness. When Liz heard this, she added, and then of course it can become too stylized, and too many rules, and too many complications of signals and signs and stuff, and somebody can call them back to what is more important, and all these other, that is articulators can come along of that lifestyle. But basically, something happens in which they all get pulled together. So, and that's called Arigness. You find out about it every once in a while in basic questions, and he writes it in the margin all over his works once he discovers this term, as if it really explains something. Now, yeah.
Just one more thing. As things get clearer and clearer, not only are they gonna move further away from the sort of stuff, the earthy part, but there are going to be things that's going to have to leave out, right? And there are going to be sort of conflicts that are going to come out.
Good.
So there's, along with the increasing sort of consistency and coherence and all that, are going to be contradictions. Are going to become clearer.
Right. Good. And Liz is adding a missing piece. If you really want to know, if you really want to try to figure out what's happening here, you'd have to, well, what is it the way practices gather that calls to articulators? And that's easy. They are, articulators are called to make them come out in their own most when they've been buried in banality, and the practices tend not only to organize, but to organize so as to bring things out at the best. And they call articulators when they need them to help, is the picture, I think. But then she wants to know, and what about reconfigurers? How can the practices that are tending toward more and more organization, more and more clarity, and so forth, ever produce reconfiguring? Well, then you have to add a Kuhnian move, which is how I described it when Liz told it to me. The Kuhnian move is that this will produce anomalies. If you try to get everything clear and articulated and gathered in a way that will bring out everything at its best, you'll produce problems. You'll produce contradictions. You'll produce, in Kuhnian terms, anomalies, things that just won't fit. And now what reconfiguring would look like is you get a culture in which things are becoming problematic and don't fit together, and there are marginal practices which, if you made them central, would be able to fit some of those things together. Then you get the kind of revolution that a reconfigurer makes. Is that how we think about it? Okay. Now, I got 2 minutes. Let me try something. I got this great idea that Heidegger, see if I can grab it from the next book, just to point you at an interesting issue. Maybe I can't do it, but give me 1 minute. See if I can do it. Okay, yeah, there's a sense in which Heidegger is trying to be an articulator and a reconfigurer in basic questions. You can just use this as a possible way of transition. He keeps saying that he wants to renew our grasp of something the Greeks understood and we've lost the track of. Something more basic than correctness about truth. Something about the way everything is that makes truth possible. Roughly, that everything is unconcealing, and what that means. And in that sense, he definitely is always trying to play the role of recalling us to things that are important in our tradition, which still make a difference to us now. And to get them right would make a big difference to us now, and to retrieve them and so forth. But he also is playing the role of reconfigurer, because he wants to say there's something that's really important to us now that's always been in the background. Was missed by the Greeks and is missed up to now. And this is really dramatic and not pretentious. And he says if we saw it, it would begin a new beginning. It would be a new history. So I can't help but think that he's running for reconfigurer. He's saying, look, we've got problems in our culture now, terrible problems. There's something I see that we've always missed that's been on the margin, and it's important, it's crucially important. If I can tell it to you so that you see how important it is, and start living as if it's important, and preserving it, you will have a new history, you will have a new beginning. Everything will look different. And so it's pretty amazing that I think Heidegger is running for both these jobs, and thinkers can do that, so why shouldn't he be able to do it? And, well, we'll stop with that. Next time you'll see him trying to do it. But you can read this book as Heidegger trying to do both these jobs.